are live. How about
Yes.
this?
We did it.
We did it. Guys, this is a new way of going live that I've never done before. So that's why I'm a little more excited than usual. But here we are, episode 305 of Keeping Karlsson, the pre-show, the YouTube pre-show before we get to the actual show. So anyone watching
here.
Is this
the error episode?
The error episode?
Isn't 305 a popular error that comes up a lot?
404.
I know 404.
Maybe I'm thinking of 404.
I'm gonna look up a 305 error.
HTTP
Service error.
305.
It's a do you do a lot of Windows updates?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, that's the first.
That's clearly what I'm
result.
talking
Oh,
about.
there's a 503 error that's common.
Well, 305 is a use proxy. That's what this one is.
How often do you use proxies, Ben?
Oh, buddy, you don't get me started.
The requested resource is available only through a proxy, the address for which is provided in the response.
Can we start naming our episodes after the error, after computer error?
Okay, we'll call this one use proxy. The next one will be switch proxy. The next one will be temporary redirect. I'll send you guys the link. There's a Wikipedia page of all the HTTP status codes.
We'll have to come up with some adjoining tradition for short shifts.
Right, yeah. Well, you're starting at what episode are you on? 20 or something.
Right, we'll clean up for all the episodes you guys blatantly missed. All the amazing errors that could have been.
Well, you first have to get yourselves up to episode 100 because there's no code lower than 100.
Well.
All right. So here's the plan. I'm here. Brian's here. Ben's here. We're going to do a show. We haven't even really talked too much amongst ourselves. We have a plan. We're all bringing in things. I'm just letting people know who are watching, but we're going to do a quick little thing where Brian and I first are going to start our Audacity. So let's do that. So Brian, just let me know when you're ready. Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. So 3, 2, 1, record.
Recording.
Okay, then I can do that. Then I have to on Zoom say to record to this computer. Then I just have to always hope that this will work. All right, so everything's recording. Everything's good. So that's exciting. Now, so yeah, basically, are we thinking just I'll open the show. We'll say Dauber Hockey, all the stuff. I'll introduce Ben. Then I'll say the plan is that we've watched the playoffs. And now we all have these different takeaways from the playoffs that we're just going to kind of take turns. And then Ben, did you want to do this judging? Are your guys more like hot takes or are they just general discussion points?
Oh, I'm just going to follow mine are just
Ben's
things I can pepper in along the way. I was going to leave it to Ben's to I
wasn't really, I don't know. I think that the idea of this got miscommunicated in the Discord because when I pitched it, I was like, it'll be a short shifts episode where we come up with some hot takes about the RTP. And in my mind, where short shifts is both of us bring the things in, I was thinking it was everyone was going to go that way. But y'all were thinking about me joining with my takeaways. So we got a little confused at that point. But I think, I don't know, aren't we just going to say what we, in my mind?
Yeah. I've got takeaways too.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking more in terms of
that are more comments on the playoffs rather than takeaways.
Not actual fantasy things, more just Brian's gripes with the playoffs.
Yeah, Brian's gripes with the playoffs.
This will be the negative episode of Keeping Karlsson, where we say everything we don't like. Okay. Fun. Okay, so what I was gonna say is, do we want it to be some sort of judgings? That's all, because I remember Ben, you brought up something like that, or should it just be just discussions? Because at one point you brought it some gamify of we're gonna vote on each other's.
I guess I pitched that it was basically a reply all ripoff. That's the yes maybe segment of just do you guys agree with things? But I don't think that we need to gamify it so much as I think the interesting part is the conversation.
Okay. All right. So we'll make this work. So I'll just basically say that Ben and I will go back and forth with things and Brian's going to pepper in things as we go. Brian. Okay. Let's just start the show.
Every 15 minutes, Brian's just going to scream something that he noticed when
they shouldn't have played. It's a pandemic.
And by the way,
the way that everyone was tweeting how there's 0 cases, oh, you want me to like your league? Well, what was that joke again? That tweet that you made, Brian?
Please
Check
like
out
my sport.
Please Like My Sport. We have 0 cases. Nerds. That's my.
I mean, you got to give it to the NHL. I was, they've done a great job.
Yeah,
They have done a great job.
Oh, I was gonna say Ben and I have got to give it to the NHL, and Brian is gonna
Give
poop
it
on
to the NHL.
I mean, I can always find something to be mad about.
Yeah,
Me
well,
too.
Ben
I've
was
been
mad
saying
about.
that's a skill of mine recently.
Well, you were mad about the draft, everything until the Rangers got the first.
What are you
overall
talking
pick.
about? The draft was perfectly done. They nailed everything about it. Yeah,
All
no,
right.
I mean, the draft was a disaster. The concept was poorly done. It resulted in the greatest possible outcome, but
Yeah, there you go. All right. So, oh, by the way, is anyone here? I don't think I've checked that. Hello, if you're here in the chat, like say hi. Hi, I'll see you. So that we're all here. We're here too. Okay, so let's start the show. This will be fun.
I think it's the three of us watching, and then Big
One
Brother
other person.
maybe is the fourth.
And obviously, guys, like I'm sure. I don't know if Ben, it's been a while. Like mute when you're not talking. All that classic stuff. Like
Right.
Okay.
Shams is here.
I love Shams.
Hi, Shams.
Shams knows a lot about hockey cards. Every single player.
Like your life has become. It's been a really interesting and like fast pivot.
Yeah, it's not a pivot, but I'm not playing fantasy right now, so I need to do something.
Oh yeah, like you're not pivoting away from anything. It's just like become such a huge storyline.
And so quickly, like it immediately got into episodes where you'd be like, "Listen, I hope that Luke Kunin goes off. I got that $1.50 rookie card. I'm counting on it."
I actually just before we started, I bid. It was very exciting. There was a Elias Pettersson 10 out of 10 PSA, like super, like mint condition Young Guns card. And I decided, like, I chatted with Dina and I was like, this is a good investment. Like, he's going to be so great for years. Like, and it was only like, anyways, I bid like $230 on the card because it had been selling for like $4. Anyways, I don't need to justify myself. Anyways, I bid like $230 and like my bid was like $217 and I said that my max bid was $230. And then we were like watching my phone as it counted down and it was like 1 minute left and I was still the high bidder. It was so exciting. We started counting down from like 20 in Russian. It was very fun. And then we got to like 10, like, yes. Yeah, and then all of a sudden just like outbid. And then it sold for like $300. And it was like, I wasn't even close.
Whoa.
It was a very depressing but exciting end. But it's like very exciting. I'm bidding on these cards. Like it made me feel smart, even though I didn't get the card. I liked that my instinct was right that buying this card for $230 would have been a smart idea.
I'm glad you had positive takeaways because I feel like it would be like very disheartening to see all of those outbids all at the end.
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm learning about. But anyways, I'll save that for my podcast.
I think too, it's good that Dina's into it. That's nice that you guys were both like that. Shows that it is exciting that she got pumped.
Yeah, I mean, I that was my goal of that whole interaction. Ask for Anyway, okay, all right. So let's start the show. Yeah! Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who are excited to still have some hockey action coming for at least one more game. I'm your host, Elon Dubrowski, and with me are a couple people, but first of all, of course, our friend, the fantasy hockey robot, the poobah of prognostication, the IPP MVP, Brian Com.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again for what could be, or actually what is guaranteed to be the last episode of what will be the super weird 2019-2020 NHL regular and postseason. Happy to wind this down with everyone. Thank you for still being here with us. For all those who are still joining us weekly, it's crazy that we're doing this. This is the most playoff podcasting we've ever done. In the weirdest year that's ever happened. So I don't know if there's a correlation between those two things, but needless to say, we appreciate you being along with us for the ride.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully make it worth your while one last time, if you'll concur that we've made it worth your while up till now. I guess you wouldn't be listening otherwise. But yeah, Brian is right, by the way. We used to always just go bi-weekly come playoffs because we're not even playing fantasy. But we thought, what the heck? We had such a long break that it was like, now we were too excited. We had to talk about it every single week. And yeah, we've got some fun takeaways to talk about today, not only about this latest round, but also about the whole playoffs. And to help us do that, we've brought in a ringer, our friend from the Average Time on Ice Twitter account and the Short Shifts episodes that were on our podcast feed, what feels like a million years ago, but it was actually just, 3-4 months, I don't know, back when the world was a little bit more normal. But anyways, You know him, Ben Burnett. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you so much, Elon. I think it's been 6 months
Oh my
since we've
God.
done short shift. So yeah, it's been a hot minute, but I am very excited to be here tonight and chat with you guys again.
You know what's funny? It's like in my head I was almost thinking both. It feels like it's been forever, but also like it may have just been recently. And it was like time has kind of become weird right now, and especially with the hockey playoffs. Like right now we're in September, right? We're almost done September. We would normally be drafted. This would be an episode doing last minute draft prep before the new season starts. Like we'd be all talking about training camp and quickly grab Victor Olofsson. He's on the top line with Eichel. This is what we were saying a year ago today, and now here we are talking about the Stanley Cup Finals, which are now 3-2 for Tampa Bay after that really fun game yesterday. Went to double overtime. You guys all know this, right? I'm not going to recap hockey, but it looked like it was going to be over, but no, we get some more action. And I'm happy actually that Tampa Bay won that game, because I was expecting, Ben, for you to come on and roast me a little bit, because you were just messaging us in our group chat yesterday about how you just recently listened to last week's episode where when we released it, it was 1-0 for Dallas. And I was saying, wow, like Chip Alexander was so smart to predict Dallas to win. And look at that. Now it's 1-0. This Dallas team, you can't beat them. And then after that, Tampa went on to look really good in the next 3 games. So at least it's not like I'm a total idiot for having made that call.
Yes, you had the worst possible outcome through 3 games after that, but then the Stars came to your defense before. I mean, I didn't even have to roast you, Elon. You did the self roast there.
I played myself. Okay, so before we get to everything, I haven't even really said what our plan is for today, but you'll come along for the ride. We're gonna have some fun. So let's mention, of course, that we are presented by DauberHockey.com, which is the #1 fantasy hockey website in the world. You got articles every day. You think like it's even like a minor thing, like a Mike Matheson for Patrick Hornfist trade. You're gonna have a full breakdown article of all the fantasy impact. That's the kind of site that Dauber Hockey is, and every single day you've got new stuff coming up, fantasy insights, plus all the tools over at Frozen Tools. I love it. Check it out, dauberhockey.com. But okay, I guess let's talk about what our plan is for today, which is basically we've all come up with some takeaways from this return to play that we've been watching over the past couple of months. I assume most of them are going to be fantasy related, but I'm not going to nitpick if Brian wants to throw in a gripe about something the NHL did poorly, or if Ben wants to throw in something about how great the Rangers are. But I think it's going to be fun, and we'll kind of like figure it out as it goes. Like, do either of you have like sort of a general comment before we start getting into these takeaways?
I'm kind of thinking of it as like basically, because the NHL is so weird this year, and as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, all of the uncertainty that went into the last few months, it's just a totally different offseason than anything we've ever seen before. So I was kind of thinking of it as a like breaking through the narratives to just sort of see what things matter going into the off season, and what we'll kind of be tracking at the beginning of the off season as we move through. Typically right now, like you said, Elon, this is happening in June and July, but instead we're in the end of September. So I just had a lot of thoughts about how things have changed this year compared to the usual off season.
And I have thoughts that came to me while I was half asleep on the couch watching the Game 6 last night. Or it was Game 5. See, that's how asleep I was. I barely knew, but I had some very old man quarrels about how I felt about watching the game that I actually already dropped into the Discord group. So apologies to those who are already in there for hearing this twice, but now I'm going to enrich them with more detail. But I'm going to try and stay positive, of course, because everybody loves hockey.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say, Brian, because I was enjoying watching that game yesterday. I don't know where you're coming from. So for me, it's like more fantasy related, of course, because that's the only thing I think about. But obviously, you guys maybe have some more nuance as purists or whatever Brian is.
I'm not a purist. I'm a grumpy old man. Is essentially what I am. I was enjoying the game, but it's funny because what you said about how normally this time of year we're looking to the preseason, and normally in June, I'm just like, oh man, this is going too long. Like, I don't care about the Stanley Cup at this point. I was still having those feelings last night. So that's a preview of what I have to say. But honestly, let's try and keep it fantasy focused. I'm very interested to hear yours and Ben's, and then maybe I'll pepper my thoughts as I see fit. But I would like to keep the mood upbeat. We need good vibes right now.
Sure, always.
Good vibes only.
So yeah, and obviously we'll love to hear from you. Tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson, both your thoughts on any of our takeaways here, and also if you have your own takeaways, maybe we could do a follow-up episode with any takeaways we hear from people. But let's get this ball rolling. Ben, why don't you get started? Drop your number one return to play takeaway that you came up with.
Yeah, so for me, I think this isn't as specific of a take as I'm going to get further on, but it's sort of like my overall thesis for as we head into this offseason. I just feel like these playoffs, even more than normal, need to be taken with a large disclaimer, not to overrate this sample. Like, I know that in these unprecedented times is like a meme at this point, but in this situation, we need to recall that in addition to these playoffs being a small sample size, they also represent so much confusion and uncertainty and like environments that players were going into without having any sort of context. I don't know if you guys read that ESPN article that was talking about players' expectations of the bubble being kind of shattered when they arrived. And then there's all these reports about teams showing up and finding, like they didn't find chemistry in training camp or whatever it is, all these disjointed teams. There's no way for us to know which ones are true, right? Which reports, because after a team gets knocked out of the playoffs every single year, you're going to hear, it wasn't meant to be. This group, the narrative takes over. And so I think that that's more true than ever this year. And so I think that we just need to not overrate small sample sizes, even more, keep your memory. And I think that the best example of this would be thinking about the Dallas Stars. If anyone were to go into a draft in a few months and start to think, all right, what's changed since I was last playing fantasy? They're going to see Dallas as a finals team and think, oh, maybe Dallas started to figure out what was going on there. But the top line isn't really scoring. Joe Pavelski's leading the team. He has a 60-point pace over 82 games. I don't want people to overrate what has happened over the past few months when it comes to making their offseason decisions.
Okay, I feel that for sure. I think Joe Pavelski's a name for sure that I'm feeling that about, like his stock. I think what you're trying to say is when it seems someone's stock has risen because of their playoff performance, it's just an illusion because we're in these super kooky circumstances and playoffs aren't really reliable anyway for telling us what to expect for the next season in most cases. Honestly, I think playoffs are about as informative as preseason in terms of giving us fantasy takeaways. Although okay, I'll correct one
strong,
piece of
but
that.
sure.
Oh, it's a hot take. You got to keep it spicy. We're like, look at what we're doing weekly through the postseason. We're podcasting, but I'll edit that take a little to say in the playoffs, you might have an insight as to what line combos and things are happening. But in terms of individual player performance, it's been nice to see Pavelski come into his own. It's been really nice to see Jamie Benn wake up. It's been nice to see Alex Radulov still become a reasonably consistent producer again. But this doesn't mean that this is what I'm expecting from them when we go back to regular season. Playoff hockey is a different animal. I don't think you can take a whole lot away from what you see. Sure, some players will break out and that'll carry through into the next season. But really, aside from deployment information, I don't really gather a ton. Although one guy you can say who's stuck has not risen at all, Tyler Seguin, who has 2 goals in 25 games since return to play. He has 66 shots though. So he's still, it's still not the shot volume that I want to see from him, but almost approaching 3 shots per game. That's a start.
Well, also
unfortunately, what? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if you're done or not.
Okay. I mean, we've been doing this for so long, Elon. I would think you would know when I'm
start. I thought that was like an end of a sentence.
Okay, it wasn't, but it's not what I'm hoping to see. It's nice that he's thrown 5 assists together in his last 2 games. Because before that, he wasn't even on the score sheet. But now it's just like, okay, Tyler Seguin's on the score sheet, but he needs to get back into that goals column. I keep feeling like I want to predict him to score the next big goal, but I think the only goal he can score now is the series clinching goal. Like that would be the only way this narrative can go from here. So Elon, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts that you could not wait to share.
Well, now I can't edit that out. Say it again in a different way also, just in case.
Well, I can just take out the so Elon, like just
whatever. I'll just talk. Okay. Forget about editing.
No, take out. No, you should edit it out. It was not good.
Well, I had a whole edit point set for like.
Well, yeah. So
I'll
you
remove my
so take out the so Elon from where I said so Elon.
that you you said so that you so apparently couldn't wait to hear or whatever. You said a whole thing. You said a whole sarcastic vibe.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Do you want to? Okay, let me just go.
So no, I'll say. Okay. Do you want me to give a generic Sagan wrap?
I don't even know. Let me just talk. I'll just go.
Okay.
Yeah, so of course we have talked on the show about how Tyler Seguin apparently had a wrist injury. I guess we'll get confirmation on that once the playoffs are over. So I think that might end up answering why he's having more trouble scoring. Also, I guess we can't bury the lead that just yesterday he had a great 3-assist game. So it's the kind of thing where like what Ben said with small sample sizes, I almost feel like my whole thoughts of Seguin have sort of changed after watching yesterday's game, which is crazy because that's just a single game. But yeah, he's definitely a guy that, yeah, I know that Ben is saying don't put too much stock in things, but it's hard not to be a little concerned about Seguin. Though, of course, for me, that wrist injury also will clarify why maybe he's been quiet. So I'm interested to see all the news that comes out. You know, whenever a team gets eliminated, you always get all these like updates on the health of all the different players. Okay, I guess like what about on the negative side in terms of like some goalies? Like for me, one of my takeaways, so maybe I'll go into that, but then it'll also still be talking about Ben's takeaway, and you could tell me whether or not we should be reading into this. But like Binnington, he stunk, right? Like that was like, I think a big narrative earlier on in the playoffs. This was after already a not great season. And then he like totally blew it in the playoffs. And like one of my takeaways was going to be like Binnington really goes into next season not like super entrenched, even though St. Louis does trade away Jake Allen, which makes things a bit more interesting. But like, I just like don't have a lot of confidence in Binnington. And maybe it was already waning a bit after like not the most amazing regular season, but now it's gone down a lot, along with I'll say Braden Holtby and Sergei Bobrovsky are goalies that just like Holtby and Bobrovsky weren't around too long. But yeah, those three goalies are the ones that if I was already down on them after the regular season, I'm like even more down on them after the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you that those are three. I feel the same way, but I'm not changed by their playoff performance just because it was kind of in line with what I expected. Actually, I'll say on the topic of Binnington, I'm a little bit more bullish on him, if only because they clearly didn't value what Jake Allen was bringing to the table, which I kind of felt anyway. I know that the Jake Allen hype was starting to get a little hot, but maybe they just couldn't turn down what the Habs were offering because of the cap relief. But to me, that trade says that they're going into next year and they plan on giving Binnington the same number of starts.
Okay, that's interesting because I thought that trade said, well, maybe we can save some cap space and still get something out of Ville Husso. And I guess, is there nobody else in the picture now? I just want to double check this because
I think that there's also still all of unrestricted free agency. Who knows if St. Louis maybe goes for one of those guys. I will say that like definitely the coaching staff, like they said, I think the GM said this, like, no, like Binnington's still our guy. And like, that's like one thing. And I feel like that's more though useful for forwards, right? Like just to know a forward is going to be sticking on the top line, on the top power play. Like, you know, there's some baseline production you're going to get, but like, St. Louis could be as confident as they want to be in Binnington, and they can say all they want about how confident they are. But if he comes in and puts up a 900 save percentage or lower, then he's not going to be valuable to your fantasy team regardless. So regardless of what anyone says, I'm just concerned that he might just not be as good at playing goalie as we thought he was at this time last year.
It's going to be a weird kind of situation to be able to tease apart if Pietrangelo does not, in fact, re-sign with the Blues, to tease apart how, if Binnington does struggle, how much of that is because he's just not up to the task, and how much of that is because the Blues lost their biggest minute defenseman and probably one of the top 5 defensive defensemen in the league who sees more than 20 minutes a night, pretty much every night. So it's going to be a weird sort of change if Pietrangelo isn't there to try and understand like, should Husso get a chance, or does the whole team just need to adjust because they've lost such a huge part of their lineup? So I think that's going to buy Binnington some time, to be honest. So Ben, I kind of am with you in that I think Binnington is going to get more chances than he normally would if Pietrangelo does leave and that defense core has a bit of a makeover and has a lot of adjustments to make. Because otherwise I think he'd have a week or two, or who knows, right? Like when you said that the management came out and said that Binnington was going to be their guy, it reminds me a lot of the Penguins saying Matt Murray's our guy, Matt Murray's our guy over and over, long after we all know he shouldn't be. So I don't know. I'm excited to see what Husso is able to do. If we all remember, Husso was like we were calling him a sleeper the season that Binnington broke out, and I think he was injured at the time that the opportunity was there for Binnington to come in because of injuries to Jake Allen and I can't remember who the other guy was at the time. I don't know
Carter
if it was
Hutton. I don't know.
It was Carter Hutton or Brian Elliott or someone. But Husso just wasn't available for that opportunity, and only that gave Binnington the ability to leapfrog Husso. So I'm wondering if Husso can really get back in there and throw another punch.
Oh, Ben, you're muted.
But you guys aren't like rating Husso when it comes to like drafting next year, right?
No, I
like
mean,
the value of a Ville Husso, as it is with any backup goalie coming into the league, is that maybe he could become valuable later on. And I think my takeaway with Binnington from the return to play is he could have had a 930, he could have had a 750 in save percentage. I probably wouldn't, change my opinion of him too directly, but the main thing is like I think of him as a average-ish starter on a good team, and the Blues clearly are not committing to anyone else, right? Like they bailed on Jake Allen after he had a much better season, so they're obviously not going to then just be like whoever we pull up is going to start 40 games. Like that seems ridiculous. So to me, I just don't see the team going off of Binnington within the first half of next year.
Yeah, that's fair. I totally agree. Like, and again, like regardless, I thought Binnington was going to be the starter and get lots of games next year. So again, just my takeaway is that I'm more concerned that he might not be that great. So we'll see. And Bobrovsky, by the way, is another one I'll just throw out there. He had a couple good games and a couple bad games against the Islanders. This is like a way long time ago, back when they were in the qualifying games. Yeah, he's just another guy. We don't even really need to discuss him. But again, just like St. Louis, like it's not as if the Panthers have someone else ready to come in. I guess Chris Drieger is the guy at some point. Obviously, they've got Spencer. What's his name? Spencer Knight. That's going to one day, hopefully, bail this team out in nets if Bobrovsky's not able to. And maybe it might have to come sooner than later. But yeah, he's another guy. It's like one of these things where you almost want to say, like maybe he's a sleeper for next year because he did so badly this past season and the playoffs he wasn't great. So he's going to fall so much that, you have this hunch where you always want to be like, now's a great time to buy low because like he can't get any worse. And that's true, like I guess to some extent, but color me like not super optimistic, I guess, especially on this Panthers team, which I don't know, have they maybe improved their defense by trading away Mike Matheson? Maybe that's though he was scratched for a bunch of games and it's not like Bob did any better. So not excited about him. And then and my last guy was Holtby, who we'll have to see where he goes. And then we could judge the team that pays too much for him.
Elon, let me ask you this. Do you, when looking at a fantasy goalie, think more about the player or the team that they're on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I feel like it's been evolving. It also there's like a few things, right? There's the player, the team, and then there's also like the situation in terms of, when you say the team, there's both like how good their defense is and how good they are like winning games. And there's also like what's the competition within the team, like who's going to compete with that goalie. So you look at the Islanders next year. I feel like Varlamov was fantastic, and everyone says that Sorokin is amazing. But neither of them are probably going to go near the top of fantasy drafts just because the other guy is there. And so you don't want to like play or pay a lot for a goalie that's maybe will only play half the games, which is a great situation for the Islanders. But yeah, I think for me, it's like, that was actually going to be another one of my takeaways. Maybe we can now go to another one here. Is like, this whole goalie situation is so weird in the league because so many teams we saw had success by playing multiple goalies in the playoffs or like switching over to their backup. Like obviously Hudobin is the biggest example where Bishop was injured and Dallas like really lucked out by having such a good backup goalie in Hudobin. And so you think more NHL teams next year are going to try to go with this idea of like, going 50-50. Also, we saw Carey Price, by the way, like out of nowhere, go back to his vintage form after being able to finally rest for a little while. It took a pandemic for Carey Price to be able to take a couple of days off and not have to play every single game. And we saw how that helped him. So on one hand, I would think that all the, in terms of fantasy, like I'm going to try to find, okay, sorry. What I want to say is like, I used to in fantasy be like, I'm not even going to bet on a goalie because it's so unpredictable and some goalies are good and some goalies are bad. And like, but now I feel like it's almost like with all these teams going towards this idea of having tandems, I almost feel like the goalies that are not in tandems on good teams, which are becoming fewer and farther between, are becoming like almost like so much more valuable that now I almost have to like switch my policy of generally not betting high on goalies. I don't know if I've come to this decision, so maybe you guys can help me, but I feel like an Andre Vasilevsky, who Tampa just plays every single game in the playoffs with confidence, and you know that's going to happen again next season, or like a Carter Hart on Philadelphia. Like these guys are going to play a ton of games on what probably a playoff team, you know, I think almost definitely playoff teams, like really good teams. And I feel like that's going to be so rare. Like there might not be that, like Montreal just got Jake Allen. I think the plan is to not play Carey Price anywhere near how many games they've played him the last few seasons. So I don't know, Brian, I guess I'll throw to you. Like, what do you think? Like, is this kind of like dumb to now go back to overvaluing goalies like we used to a few years ago before we learned that you don't want to do that because they're so unpredictable?
I don't think this is a huge change from, like, I'll start by saying this seems really consistent with what we've already been seeing. I'm looking at our Schmore goalies board rankings from before this season even began, and we had Vasilevsky and Anderson as unchallenged starters on good teams that you want a piece of. And then we had Fleury, Price, Gibson, and Bobrovsky. So we had 6 goalies who we were like, sure, they're entrenched. And if you want to go for that dedicated starter, though, that's all you can choose from. Everybody else has at least someone breathing down their necks, if not who's already like wedged themselves into 30, 35, even 40 starts. So I agree that pool is still really compelling because there's so few of them, like the Carter Harts, especially if you know they're really good. But how many goalies I'm going to name you like who can actually deliver on being the workhorse and actually hold up good numbers over the course of the season? Because going into this one, we named Vasilevsky, Anderson, Fleury, Price, Gibson, and Bobrovsky. One of those guys, Andre Vasilevsky, would have been consistently helpful to you the whole season long. So if you want to throw that dart and try and land that one starter who's going to be good for you the whole season long, that's great. Go for it. But I really think there's going to be enough value to be found later in your drafts and in free agency. I mean, look at the Columbus goalies coming out of nowhere. Look at Linus Ullmark. Look at Thomas Greiss and Semyon Varlamov. There are lots of players, especially if you start looking at systems rather than goalies, which I think is one takeaway I've got from these playoffs. Is Dallas's defensive protection in the playoffs hasn't been as great as it has been in the regular season and over the last few years, as Ben and I were discussing on the Facebook group not too long ago. But you look at the Islanders, it's like, oh yeah, Barry Trotz's teams protect their goalies. Dallas is another team that protects their goalies. Minnesota is another team that protects their goalies. So I actually think rather than looking to spend a high draft pick and invest in a goalie just because you think he's going to be a workhorse, first, buyer beware, because a workhorse goalie actually putting up great numbers all season long is a really freaking tall task for a workhorse goalie and for you to actually get it right of the 5 or 6 who might actually have a chance to do that. And then on the other hand, you can probably get someone a lot deeper in the draft by just biding your time. So I am not into investing in one of these workhorses. I'm okay to spend another roster spot or 2. And we saw Elon and Ben in the cupful too. People placed a lot less value on goalies, especially, I mean, that has to do with the weight we put on goalies and how we balance our league so that, you know, one goalie doesn't win you the league. But names were constantly available. And if you needed spot starts and wanted to ride a goalie here and there, you usually could. I had 5 goalies on my roster at times just because I was, you know, trying to gather games and this was the best strategy for me in a given week. But I just don't see a reason to go all in on committing to a goalie when you can get a much surer thing in a skater.
Right. So Brian, just to be clear, what you're saying now is exactly what I was also saying, like what we both agreed on going into the season, right? My point was, because you said like maybe you can throw a dart. What I'm saying is maybe my takeaway is it's not a dart. There's like 2 guys, you know, I'm talking like that, like my
but even they are darts. Like even you're even risking on them.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Like you are risking, but I feel like when I used to think I'll get a starter later on, Like, I'll be able to I don't need to take one of these top starters because there's lots of other starting goalies and who knows which one is going to be good. I guess and I'm not even necessarily saying this is how I feel. It's sort of just a thought that's come to my head is with fewer like sure starters in the league, getting like, does that push Vasilevsky up the draft board? Like, does he become a guy to take in the first round? Because now it's like, if you don't get him, sure, you could go for a Columbus goalie. Sure, you can go for like an Islanders goalie, but it's really unlikely that one of them is going to actually play a lot of games. And if your league values, I'm talking about for league, I'm not like, the couple doesn't necessarily value volume, right? So maybe that's not the best example, but if you're in a league that counts saves or wins and you care a lot about just getting a lot of games, I wonder if the fact the league has started to transition into most teams having tandems that play 50-50, does that make the few guys left like so much more valuable, like a Vasilevsky and Hart? So that's why I'm wondering, like, should these guys now be considered like first round picks in a lot of leagues just because they're like the only reliable options left? Like, you could throw Hellebuck, but we have our concerns about the Jets, and like a lot, say at Allmark, but we have our concerns about Buffalo. So I feel like we're almost like really narrowing down to like, I know you said that we already did this going into the year and you went through Schmorgolsborg, but I wonder if it's like going to become like tier 1 and then tier 3, and there is no tier 2 because every goalie ends up like falling into this pile of like they're going to be in a tandem.
I don't at all disagree that Vasilevsky and we don't know what's going to happen with Fleury in Vegas, but if Lehner is like the only one standing there, so Vasilevsky and Lehner and Carter Hart are first round worthy draft picks in your fantasy leagues, they're just not ones that I'm going to make. It obviously comes down to how comfortable you are investing that much in a goalie. I think I can find more value. I can compensate more and make up for the goalie position later in the draft than I could a skater.
Yeah, you might get to a point where you're going to decide by not taking one of these sure starting goalies, you have to then realize I'm going to need to take an extra goalie in this draft. Like, I could take Vasilevsky and have an extra skater on my team all season long because I don't need extra goalies to like meet my minimum starts or to have a chance of taking wins every week. Or I can take like a sure starting goalie and then maybe only hold 1 or 2 goalies instead of having to hold 3. So anyways,
in leagues that prioritize volume, for sure, like these guys still hold a lot of weight, especially if they're on like quality teams like Philly and Tampa. Again, there's no doubt they're top round picks. They might even be like way up there depending on your format. I've just been burned too many times.
For sure.
I'm not going to change it, but I hear what you're saying, that these guys are like even more rarefied air. So you really have to go for, like, if you want to go for them, you really have to go for them.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm going to change it either, but I was just saying, like, it's something that's crossed my mind. Ben, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I'd like to expand the discussion on goaltenders next year, because I agree with you guys that the guys at the top obviously have a bit of an extra appeal that they would going into this year. But what I think is really interesting is thinking about what the makeup of a 2021 season looks like, because, and this was a takeaway that I was going to get into a bit later, but this next year could be 40 games in 80 days. You know what I mean? The season could be compressed. The schedule could be games every other day. We could be looking at, specialized bubbles. So teams are, 8 teams go into one city and they play there. Like, we still don't know what next year looks like. And so as a result, I think those middle guys, you talked about a tandem, like a Sorokin Varlamov situation, or Shesterkin and Georgiev maybe on the other New York team. Both of these guys are going to have certain value because there's going to be a shorter turnaround because of the possibility of shorter turnaround between games. That's something that we all need to be looking forward to, or looking towards, when we're doing drafts next year.
Actually, Ben, that's a really smart point, because even like, let's say if we weren't having the compressed schedule, you do just, first of all, just to address what you're saying, is like, if all goalies are tandems, like, let's say aside from like Vasilevsky and Hart, like those couple guys like Hellebuck or whatever, if most goalies are tandems, then all of a sudden now we can start valuing like someone like Varlamov, who we never would have considered more than like a later mid to late round pick, because he's going to be in a tandem. Now all of a sudden, if everyone is, now you can start looking at who is the best tandem goalie. Maybe all of a sudden this becomes like the top 5 goalie in fantasy. So that is interesting. And then you're right, with the shortened schedule, you got to think that more teams are going to do tandems than usual. Like, maybe even Tampa Bay is going to have to play McElhenney or whoever they decide to be their backup next year more than they normally would, just because they don't want to tire Vasilevsky out more than even just a normal heavy season goes. So yeah, that's a very interesting point.
And I wonder if that would just lead to a lot more of a revolving door for goalies. Like, if every team, let's just say for argument's sake, 30 teams in the league All right, and I know that's not every team. I'm leaving Carter Hart and Vasilevsky on their own. So 30 teams in the league are rotating 2 goalies, roughly a 50-50 split. Does everybody decide it's worth rostering both goalies and only getting, half the workload from those 2 roster spots that you once would have gotten? Or does everyone decide, okay, I've got my one guy who I never want to give up. They're really consistent over the 40, 45, like that 1A maybe. And then you just rotate other goalies through that second spot as you need. And that would, of course, like deplete the skater ranks a little more. But I wonder if the whole strategy of how to use your goalie roster spots changes as those tandem usages grow.
And that there's people listening right now that are like tearing their hair out, being like, Brian, like, I wish I could rotate, but in my league, like every single goalie is drafted and none are available in free agency. So it obviously depends on your league if you even have the option. But yeah, if you're in a league where generally there's only like, let's say 40 goalies owned total of every team in the league, then yeah, you can just kind of rotate all these different backups, especially since they're going to be playing more often than usual. But yeah, but if it's the kind of league where a lot of goalies are drafted, then yeah, it's very interesting because you got to start just really thinking like maybe now if I don't get one of the top guys, maybe I just wait a long time because normally I would have had to draft a goalie early in order to get my volume, but now the volume is a lot more spread out. So it's going to be interesting and it's something we're definitely going to have to follow. And yeah, and obviously there's always going to be a surprise with goalies. So at the end of the day, you can't predict too much. So I guess you do just sort of want to play the odds. And now there's going to be more dices that you could throw since there's going to be more goalies that we could be confident are going to play more games than usual. So cool. I guess, does anyone have any more goalie takeaways they want to get to before we move to skaters?
I have a Khudobin take.
All right. Well, first you got to say it right because I feel like after watching the whole playoffs, we can't be on this podcast saying Khudobin at this point.
Anton.
Okay, we'll talk
I
about
have an Anton take.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think warning flags up on Anton Khudobin. We've seen this before, right? Where a player looks really good right before hitting, or where a goalie in particular in their 30s looks really good before hitting free agency, and then they go to a Buffalo, and I'm thinking Carter Hutton obviously here, and everyone's like, well, I mean, they were really good last year on that good team. Maybe they can bring some legitimacy to this other team with 60 starts or whatever. I'm not saying that I guarantee Anton Khudobin is bad next year, but we've seen enough mediocre Anton Khudobin over the past 8 years for the alarm bell to be slightly raised.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, we definitely thought Khudobin was going to be a starter in Carolina, right? Like he had this basically his first season where he saw real time. He was 27 years old. He put up a 926 save percentage. This is after a year of backup duty in Boston where he put up 920 over 14 games. And then in his second season in Carolina, so basically he had 50 games under his belt going into his third season of semi-regular deployment, and he laid an egg. He just posted a 900 save percentage. But every other season that he's seen at least 30 games, essentially the last 3 seasons, he's been pretty good. And again, he plays for Dallas, and Dallas protects their goalies very well, but his numbers have still stood out. 930 this season, 923 the year before, 913 in Boston the year before that, which is like, fine, okay, I'll take it. But I do wonder, Ben, like I'll follow your train of thought. I'll bite a little and say if some team wants Khudobin to give him a rich contract and also anoint him the starter, we like all bets are off. We haven't seen this guy play more than 41 games in a season, and that's not a mark against him. But I would be at least a little wary of seeing what he is asked to do as a number 1 or a number 1A and how he manages that workload.
So let's say he goes to a bad or like a playoff bubble team. I think that he's in that tier of good goalie, bad team at his highest. Even in Boston in that last year where he played 31 games, barely a break-even goalie in goals saved above average. So yeah, I mean, he's been really good in Dallas. There's no doubt about it. But by next year, he's 35 on a team as a starter for the first time. We haven't seen how his body handles that sort of regularity. I mean, obviously, he's handling it very nicely in the bubble right now. But I'm just saying, be wary of overdrafting Anton Hudobin and getting your hopes too high.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I think he's solid, but he's going to probably be overrated going to next season in fantasy just because of how well he did in the playoffs. Obviously, we'll see where he goes, but even if he goes to like a decent enough team, let's say, I'm trying to think of like a good spot from, like, let's say he goes to like Vegas, a good team. Let's say Vegas doesn't get Leonard, then they're running like Hudobin Fleury as their tandem, which I think is like a somewhat legit possibility. He'll be good. I think he'll be fine, but he's not. He's right now. He's got superstar level. It's the same with like the hockey cards. And sorry, now I'm going
I
to start
love
bringing
him
up
on Vegas, to be clear. Like, if he went to a good team and he was going to get 50 starts, I'd be like, hell yeah, like, let's go.
Well, first of all, he won't. If a team is smart, they won't give him 50 starts. But like, he might go to a good team. He probably should go to, like, why would a bad team spend a lot of money on an aging goalie? I feel like Hudobin is perfect in what the role he's had in Dallas these past couple of years, to be like a 1B to Ben Bishop and play not half the games, but almost half the games, and really just give them this like guaranteed solid goaltending all the time. So we'll see. Obviously, we'll discuss it more once he lands on a team, but I think regardless, he'll be overrated in fantasy, even if I agree with Brian that he is like a good goalie. What I was about to say is, because I've been talking a lot about hockey cards lately, I actually started a hockey card podcast with a guy named Ryan Krieg called the Near Mint Hockey Card Podcast. You can look that up. But anyways, if I had a Hudobin rookie card right now, I'd be selling for sure. And I wouldn't be buying, because right now it's like, you could see it's super inflated. If you look on eBay at his value, and this is, to me, it's like a lot like fantasy. That's why I've kind of gotten into this hockey card thing. It's like right now his card is selling for a lot more than it, like, I think ever has. And it makes sense why, but it's also like, I'm not going to go and spend $30 on a Hudobin rookie card right now when I think next year at this time it'll fall back down pretty far. And the same thing in fantasy. Like right now is like, he's good. We knew he's good for the past couple of years, but he's not going to be this like superstar leading his team to the cup next year. I very much doubt that.
Yeah, I like, that sounds like a pretty fair like, that's not even going out on a limb, right? Like, no one is 100% bought in, especially at his age. And I'm trying to think, the goalie Ben you mentioned was Carter Hutton. I'm trying to think of how many other goalies we've seen recently have that big season just before they get moved on to a starter's role. The ones I can
well, that wasn't to a starter, so he was already a starter.
Yeah, so the ones I'm thinking of are Cam Talbot and Martin Jones. And Martin Jones is a punchline now, but his first season in San Jose, he had a .918 save percentage. Cam Talbot's first season in Edmonton, a .917 save percentage. And they actually both had a couple decent years before they each fell off. And one of them, Talbot, is just starting to recover now. But I'm trying to think of any goalie that we've seen go in his later stage career from a backup role to a starter role and really, really succeed on a new team.
Even put either of those guys in the same category, though, because I mean, Cam Talbot was 28 when he got traded from New York.
Sorry, Ben, I need to interrupt you. You're super quiet again. Could you?
Really?
Yeah.
Brian, did it seem quiet?
Yeah.
Still quiet.
Do you have like something running that's like changing your microphone volume?
Is his Zoom doing what your Zoom was doing?
Oh yeah, my Zoom sometimes does this like auto volume change. I don't know if that's
I don't know. How can I check that?
in settings. Do you have like Audacity or something running?
I don't. Should I?
No. Just I was wondering, like, is there a way to increase your microphone volume somehow? Or just start yelling?
Yeah, I don't know why you just like went silent.
It just went really quiet, eh?
Go to your audio settings in Zoom, and you can change your input volume. So check and see.
Do I hear a replay?
Oh yeah, so that's also where the checkbox is. So if you go to beside the microphone in Zoom, go to audio settings, and then it'll bring them up. And then there's a checkbox that automatically adjust microphone volume. So I would uncheck that, and then I would just set the slider to
how about now?
Yeah, now it's like too loud.
Oh, okay. A little hot. How about now?
Maybe a little more, a little louder.
Somewhere in between, please.
Right here.
That seems good.
That's good.
Okay.
That's just right.
Okay.
Where were we?
So you were saying that Hudobin's older, which is a good point. Yeah. I'll give you the data, by the way.
Well, here, let's make it make sense. Oh, you're gonna give him the
and then Ben's just gonna come in like we didn't have this conversation. If you want it, Ben.
Yeah, sounds great.
Talbot was 28 and Jones was 26.
Yeah. So to me,
you should start like responding to where I finished on Hudobin. And like you're bringing up the point that their ages were different.
Right. So my issue with comparing Hudobin to those players is just career arc wise. We're looking at a player who, in all likelihood, is in the last few years of his career. Hudobin should probably go to a team that's willing to give him, like, if he wants to maximize his career earnings, this might be his only chance to earn starters money. And so he should go and find that. However, I would be a little bit wary. The players you mentioned, they got traded. Cam Topple was like 28 when he left New York. Martin Jones was much younger and was just a player who we had not yet seen. We had not yet seen even a couple hundred starts from him at that point. Anton Hudobin is the same, but that's because he has been a career backup. So I just find it really difficult to imagine him suddenly at 35 being able to be a starting goalie in the league.
Yeah. Though before we move on, like again, like not to be negative, right? Like amazing what he's done this playoffs. And I'm super happy for it. It's fun watching his locker room little speeches where he was like, "We're not going home." And you know, I love that so much. And like
I appreciate you saying that, Elon, because I'm not trying to be negative either. And but it's, if we're looking into the future, then it's easier to find that.
Yeah, that's how you play fantasy. Of course, you got to find out who's value too high and who's value too low. So before we get to skaters now, I think we're done with goalie talk for the episode. Why don't we take a second to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, which are our friends over at DraftKings. They've been sponsoring our whole return to play slate of podcasts. They're the reason why we've been coming at you every single week, because they wanted us to tell you about the great stuff going on DraftKings. It's such a fun game. We've been playing it with the patrons the whole time, also through the playoffs, having matchups every single day. You draft a team. I assume you guys know how daily fantasy works, right? You want to like pick your players. You've got a salary that you can't go above the cap, and each player has a certain amount. And so it's like a strategy game of figuring out, you know, which guys to put in your lineup. Obviously, you've got to be smart. I actually asked one of the people, I got it, Dunnyman, Brian, the guy who keeps winning all the time. Yeah. So I asked him, like, what's your secret? And he said he's always first finding his like cheap guys that he's going to, you know, his sleepers that he's going to put in his lineup. And then he fills out the superstars later. I was always doing the opposite. And first it's like, okay, yeah, I want Kucherov. I want Brady Point. Then, okay, who do I have money left for? But this guy was going the other way and it was working out well for him. So yeah, it's a whole fun game. And then you watch the games and it adds a whole little layer. They have a really fun app where you can see all the points updating in real time, just like in fantasy, you know, and there's all these different categories that you can follow and target in terms of like, you know, you get points for shots and blocks and all this stuff. It's a blast. And I know hockey's over. So you're thinking, why are you telling me about this? I don't care because hockey's over. So tell me next year. But you know what? There are other sports in the world. I don't know if you know about this NFL football, but this is a sport where they throw the ball and they have to run. They have to get a touchdown, field goals. It's a whole exciting game. And you can play DraftKings with football and you're drafting your teams. And there's a lot of money that you could potentially win if you want to go that route. Brian, you want to tell them how?
Yeah, I'm just sorry, I'm loading the copy because I didn't have it. Okay, I've got it. Ben, also feel free when I'm done to add in your lock of the week. Okay. Yeah, all you need to do to get in on the action with us and the world, wherever it's legal, I guess, download the DraftKings app now and use the code Karlsson, like Eric's last name. And for a limited time, new users can get a free shot at millions of dollars in prizes this week. Those words are capitalized. Don't miss out on the week 3 NFL action. I think that's where we're at. Enter the code Karlsson to get a free shot at millions of dollars in prizes with your first deposit. That's code Karlsson. And also, you get to play fantasy with us on a daily basis for the last 2 games of the season, only at DraftKings. Make it rain. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details.
Is this where I give my lock of the week?
Okay. I'll throw to you. And usually, you know, Elon, you know, we mentioned football as well as we both just have, but Ben is kind of a football knower amongst us. So Ben, who's your shoe-in or your lock of the week?
Well, I had New England winning earlier today, but at this point there's only 2 games left, and by tomorrow there will only be 1. So I guess you're making me pick the Monday night winner, which is between maybe the 2 best teams in the league, the Chiefs and the Ravens. I got to take, and this is not a lock, I'm going to take the Ravens, though.
Wow. Great call.
I would have thought
Is
Yeah.
Joe Flacco their quarterback?
No.
Hmm.
No. They have the reigning MVP as their quarterback.
Oh,
What's his name?
everybody knows that guy.
His name's Lamar Jackson.
You guys know that when you're saying the lock of the week, like DraftKings doesn't work like that. You don't pick which team is going to win.
Yeah.
You got to know.
That's true.
Yeah, give us a daily fantasy lock in
It's
football.
Lamar Jackson. He's going to throw like
Lamar
5
Jackson.
touchdowns.
No
There we go.
Lamar Jackson? Yeah, well, I mean, the thing with fantasy football, is that you have to devalue quarterbacks because there are so many good ones. But with fantasy or with daily, it's obviously different. But I don't know. Stack Mahomes and the
All right.
yeah.
You heard it here first, people.
This
Stack
is good.
Mahomes, and whoever's with Mahomes, you're going to do well.
I know Mahomes.
Yeah.
He's the superstar. You should.
He's a guy I know.
Yeah, there you
I have a
go.
lot of friends who are into buying homes. Okay, that didn't work. All right, so let's move on and talk about some hockey forwards and if we've had any takeaways about them in the playoffs. How about I'll throw one out to start. I've got some guys. Again, these are going to be the coldest things I can say, but I'm just going to say the playoffs have made me even more excited about these following players than I already was. So like these are guys who are coming off great seasons, and I maybe would have already predicted them to even build on that for next year. But I've got 4 forwards in mind that I think are gonna and the playoffs have only cemented the fact to me that these are like true superstars that are about to have like monster seasons. So here are the names. These are not going to be hot takes. So you could sit down or stand up. You could drink water. I promise you won't be spitting your water out for this. Okay. Number 1 is Elias Pettersson. He is so good. So he had 18 points in 17 games for the Canucks in the playoffs. Again, some really strong goaltending, if you recall, especially in Robin Lehner at the end there. And he's coming off a 66 point in 68 game regular season. So he's already a point per game guy. I just think that it's coming. Like it's crazy to think he's only 21. He's going to turn 22 during next season. I think the 90, 95, maybe 100 point season might be upon us. And like I said, I probably would have said that anyways, but the playoffs just even more so said that, Elias Pettersson's amazing. I'll just tell you the other 2 names and you could equally not gasp. Braden Point. He's been insane in this playoffs. He's another guy who had an 80 point pace approximately this season. And like what we're seeing is like, I don't know if it's like better for him that Stamkos is gone or not, because he still played with Kucherov most of the year anyways, and he's on the top power play, and he's just really showing us that I'm for real. Like I remember a couple of years ago, we were kind of surprised when Point broke out the way he did. And at this point, it's like, this guy's a superstar that maybe even has more upside. And the last one, again, you're not going to be surprised, but Sebastian Aho. So he was eliminated a long time ago at this point, but in his 8 playoff games, he had 12 points. Carolina is just going to get better. I just talked with Chip Alexander last week about how can't hurt that Svechnikov is going to just develop into a better and better winger for Aho if they stay on the same line. And Sebastian Aho, I think he's potentially got like 90, 100 point upside for next season. So these are 3 guys that are already like point per game. And through the playoffs, have just convinced me even more so that they are real superstars that can have huge years.
Well, Elon, I'm going to just step in on point here and mention he's already done what you want him to do next year, right? He had a 92 point season the season before this one in 18-19 as a 22-year-old. And then you mentioned this year, like now in the playoffs, is he doing better because Stamkos isn't around? And I think the answer is very much likely yes. You're right. He's still playing with Kucherov, but we talked about Kucherov was it last week or 2 weeks ago, and how he's suddenly re-breaking out without Stamkos. And we said, well, without Stamkos, he has more responsibility. And I can tell you the same has been true for Braden Point, who is seeing 2 more minutes per night in the postseason. Of course, that might include like some really skewed overtime matchups.
I think it almost for sure does, Brian. In a small sample size like this, a couple of these double, triple overtime games really make a big difference.
Okay, but if I'm looking at his playoff game logs, just in time on ice, he's regularly going at least a minute longer than he would have in the regular season. There are a couple games where he was under, but mostly over his regular season pace. Although I think you're right, Elon, actually. This is mostly skewed by a few, he had a 47-minute game, a 29-minute game, 26-minute game. Those make up 3 of the 22 games in the sample. So, okay, maybe I should walk this back a little bit, but I do think that he's still being asked, like Kucherov, to do a little more with, or not being asked, has to do a little more. As we talked about a couple rounds ago, Tampa just is not so deep all of a sudden. Like, they have a lot of, their depth is strong, but that doesn't mean that they have a lot of it. Their depth players are good role players. They're perfect for that secondary, tertiary scoring role. But once you get past Point and Kucherov with no Stamkos, that's about it for like the primary scores. I know we can mention Palat and how well he's doing. Actually, he's the one I'm the most interested to see how his playoffs converts to the next season. This isn't his first rodeo in terms of being a really great producer. Remember, he broke out as one of the triplets as a 23-year-old with 63 points in 75 games. The season before that, he actually had 59 points. So he had 2 really strong seasons before disappearing into sort of this utility player. And he's someone I'm really curious to see how things play out beyond this season and whether he gets to stay up with Point and Kucherov on a regular basis, which no one ever really did. That spot rotates a lot, but he's also seeing plenty of ice time these playoffs and making the most of it. So Braden Point, I would love, and by the way, just also going back about Point, the knock against him going into this season was like he scored on pretty much, oh, this is exaggerating, but he had 20 power play goals on like 40 power play shots in 18-19. So it gave him a 22% shooting percentage. This season, he had an 18% shooting percentage. This postseason, he's shooting 20%. So this guy just can really make the most of his shooting opportunities. And I'm like very much ready to call him a high-end converter. I already was, but I think that's going to mean that he can get back closer to 40 goals than I thought he might be able to. I sort of saw him as a 30 goal scorer, but I could see 40 in his sights again. And that, of course, would help him get back up to that 90 point plus pace. So there's my whole Braden Point rundown. Pettersson, of course. The other guy you mentioned, just refresh me.
Sebastian Aho.
Sebastian Aho. Okay, yeah, of course, too. We've spoken about him, I think, just as Carolina was eliminated. Ben, what do you want to fill in some blanks here?
I have
a
few thoughts on these guys for sure. I was also thinking about Andre Palat quite a bit because I think that he's somebody who is going to be a like late mid-round. Either he's, you grab him and he puts up the 55-point pace and he gives you the banger stats and he like totally outperforms like deep roster spot, or he's like a guy that you end up having to cycle out because he gets cycled off the top line. He kind of reminds me of like a much safer version of what Ty Ratty was a year or two ago, where it's just like he just had this great, he's having an incredible playoffs, and he does have these runs of like 10 games or so where he gets the majority of his points and then he tends to go cold. So I think that Andre Palat is somebody who folks should be targeting in that like 110 to 140 overall range, who can outperform, and he can outperform that spot, but he could also, end up not on your roster at the end of the year. Braden Point was a guy I had down as well, Elon, to just say like, guys, don't worry about this past year. And the reason why I felt that people were worried is because of the injury that he had coming into the year. And he came back a little bit slower than the 92-point pace that Brian had mentioned. So definitely I am not afraid of grabbing Braden Point here. I am a little bit surprised to hear Elon cite the Chip Alexander interview as his reasoning for the Sebastian Aho breakout, not because Chip, spoke negatively about Aho, but because his when Elon asked like what the improvement could be for Aho, it was more responsibility defensively. And so if that's kind of what they're looking at for as far as his progression goes, then I like there's a lot of room for players to get much better in hockey terms and not improve in fantasy hockey terms. And so I think that Aho could just be an 85-point guy who becomes more mature defensively. Obviously, Svechnikov's development could also provide him a higher upside. I think where he's being drafted now, or where most people have him, is probably the approximate correct space. And I wouldn't think to bump him up too much higher outside of the top 25. But the one thing that I would kind of qualify all of this with is I think we sometimes get a little too hype on linear development with players and with teams. And I just don't know that I'm, like, yes, they're older, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they immediately surpass where they've been before.
I really like that point. I like linear progression is a really easy way to get misled about where a player is going. You just see them getting better and better, and you're like, okay, they're 24, okay, they're 25. Even in the years of their prime, you're not necessarily going to see that improvement over improvement every year, right? At some point, they're going to peak and plateau. Pedersen is an example of a guy I don't think we've seen that for, but actually, Elon, I forgot that you were saying like Aho's going to break out further. I almost feel like Aho might be your new Tarasenko. Like, remember Tarasenko? Like, I
You
was like,
guys are,
he's a
yeah.
guy you can set your watch to 75 points, no problem. You're not going to get more, but you're not going to get less. And you were like, no, he's got more in him. I think Sebastian Aho is probably a point per game guy, but I am also, like Ben, not willing to go far above that. I don't think there's like a breakout to a new offensive level coming for him.
Okay. We'll see. Again, what this linear progression thing, Brian Ben was referring to what I said about Svechnikov, right? I'm saying Svechnikov, who's
Yeah.
only 20, he's the guy that I'm saying has probably another gear, considering he just put
I was
up a
talking about Aho, sorry.
Yeah, so my point again, just to clarify my point, what I said in the interview, and then what I'm saying now, it's more like what I said, not what Chip said. Is I said I'm excited for Aho because Svechnikov is probably going to get better. So Aho doesn't even need to get better. Just playing with a better Svechnikov also probably helps in terms of getting more points. One thing that Chip did say though that really got me salivating is I asked about, do you think they're going to stick with the line they had in the playoffs of Teravainen, Aho, and Svechnikov, or do you think they're going to spread it around? And he said that he's been hearing that maybe they want to try to go after the same model as the Bruins, where they just have this like amazing top line. And like, as soon as you start thinking about that Bruins top line, then you start thinking about a Brad Marchand and a Bergeron and all these, and Pasternak, I'll finish the set. These are like 100-point players, right? Especially the Marchand and Pasternak. So I don't know. Brian's like very quick to just dismiss and be like, you think that Aho is a Tarasenko?
I'm not quick
you
to
said,
dismiss. I said I'm just wondering if maybe I said I have a feeling that this is going to be your next.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty confident in Sebastian Aho, and I think that he's going to be a 90-point player next year. So you've heard it here first. Brian thinks that's too hot to take. I think maybe even plus.
Okay.
Okay, I thought there was like a cold take, but now now you're giving me some juice here. I'll bring up one.
I was right about Tarasenko, so I'm not sweating.
I love how like you bring up a play. Oh, you're not sweating this because I once said that Vladimir Tarasenko could be a point per game player.
You twice said it, at least.
Okay, so I guess
Did you not think that he could be, Brian?
No, sorry. It's not that Tarasenko can't be a point per game player. Elon, you were expecting more than that from Tarasenko.
No, I was expecting a point per game. He had never hit that. So Brian, how about this? I'll just retire from podcasting because I got this Tarasenko thing wrong. So clearly, like any take I make from now on is null and void. So
I'm just saying that maybe there's an analogy to be
What's
made
the
here.
analogy? They're completely different players. One's a center. Anyway, whatever. Okay, so I will say one other player that I wanted to bring up, which isn't at the same level, but another guy that sort of just cemented to me that what I was starting to feel is like for real. And this is another guy who didn't play very much. So this is going back a little bit, but Kevin Fiala had that amazing second half of the season, as we all recall, where somehow, Minnesota went from playing him like not too often and not in big roles, and all of a sudden they put him on the top line, and he just like exploded, right? He was like a point per game guy for the second half of the season, and then for whatever it's worth, 4 points in 4 games before Minnesota got eliminated in the playoffs. So it's super small sample size, but just like I'm super excited, guys, for Fiala for next season. Again with the hockey cards, but like his rookie cards are going for super cheap right now, and I feel like by halfway through next season you're going to be able to double your investment, because I think Kevin Fiala, and same in fantasy, I think that he's still not going to go super high in drafts because people are still going to look at his like overall numbers. And so if I had to pick one player now that I think, I'm not going to say a sleeper because everyone knows he's good, but I feel like he could end up being like a Rantanen from a couple years ago, where it's like, he was getting drafted really far. Then he ended up like being like, oh, I knew he was good. I thought he was gonna be like 60 points. He turned out to be like 80 points. I think like that could be like Fiala as well next season. And so he'd be a guy that I think is going to be someone who, is just going to like overperform their draft position next year. And for the 4 games I saw in the playoffs, my mind wasn't changed.
Can I ask, what do you guys see his, like, if you guys were recording the Almanac tonight, what would you guys be projecting Kevin Fiala at?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So I guess I just sort of put my stake, but it's like, not fully researched. When we do the almanac, we're looking into a lot of stuff. Also,
I
think
know. I'm
yeah.
just saying, like,
I mean, I'm thinking like 75 points. Like right now, I'm like excited. Obviously, though, it depends. Like they just traded
with future
Stahl.
stud Luke Kunin or Joel Eriksson X centering him. Not to call back to last week's overlong argument about the two, but I need to see who's going to center him first, and we'd be making the almanac hopefully with that knowledge. So like honestly, without a center, I wouldn't give him more than 60. But with a center, I'm with Elon. I think he could go 75. I could see him being a point per game guy if he has a center that he can jibe with, or that anyone could realistically jibe with. Right now, he doesn't.
Brian, to be fair, this season, do you want to know who his most common center was?
Yeah, it wasn't Eric Stahl.
Right, it was Mikko Koivu.
Yeah,
okay?
But Mikko Koivu's good.
He's
fine.
He's
you
not
think
offensively good at all. He's offensively very bad.
Brian, you're saying that you think 37-year-old Mikko Koivu is like a big improvement over like Luke Kunin or Joel Eriksson. Like I'd imagine at the very least they're probably the same. Also, just to remind people, because I know like right now we're sort of just pointing out just some little things, but I did point out in that episode that I do think Minnesota's not done, and we've heard a lot of trade rumors about Matt Dumba, and I think it would make a lot of sense for them to move Dumba for a good center, and I think a lot of teams would be willing to give a good center for a defenseman that they perceive like to be a top 4 D-man like Dumba.
Definitely, I think that they're going to make more moves, but I'm not super bullish on the moves that they will make based on the moves that they've made so far.
That's fair.
Yeah. So like I don't know. I don't Koivu's not in his prime. Just to go back to this, but he's not nothing either. Like he's not bad. I think he's probably better than the present options to be the top line center. So like he's a responsible guy. He's a good passer. He's a steady hand. I think that all helps Fiala.
Yeah. Also, don't forget the other big unknown, which to some people isn't a big unknown, is Kirill Kaprizov might be the other player on his line. And see, the word on the street is this is a very good player, right? So obviously we haven't seen any action from him unless you've been watching some KHL games, but this might be huge for him. And there have been players in the past that put up a lot of points, even though their center wasn't amazing. I'm going to come up with an example while Ben or Brian present their next RTP takeaway. Ben, go ahead.
Should we leave it to Brian, though? I feel like he hasn't had a chance to do Brian's trademark gripes.
I'm just going to gripe towards you want to hear a gripe?
Sure.
Yeah, I guess let's hear a gripe. You already griped about how I got that Tarasenko take wrong.
Oh my God. Like I said one thing, and I'll never come for all the snipes I absorb. I think you could take this one. All right, but here's one where you can come at me. Here's a hot take. It's a chore to watch the Stanley Cup final. I think the NHL playoffs peak. I think the whole season peaks in the first round, and then like on a graph as time passes, the interest level from me and like the excitement level of watching the games just like dips slowly, so that we're in the Stanley Cup and I'm less interested in the games being played than I am at any moment. Yes, there's like these high stakes moments. Yes, there's these really exciting goals. I was watching Dallas Tampa with no rooting interest, and like my heart was in my throat or my stomach was in my chest. I don't know what the saying is, but like I was excited. It was very intense. And there were a few moments where like, again, not invested, but I was like, and that was exciting and fun. But I think those moments do get fewer and farther between, because you end up just ending up with two teams who are still alive and good for them. And often they're the better teams, but they're just grinding through their 25th playoff game or however many they've played. And they just lack the same pop that you saw them have in the first round. It's not so much like you're not seeing their best. You're seeing that they're deep teams, that they might be the least wounded teams. And that's great. Because that's what they're being rewarded for. But I am so just like, I don't know if it's also just like I'm done. Like I was saying, I feel now the way I do in June. I like hockey. I really enjoy watching it. But it's like I have to push myself sometimes to flip on the Stanley Cup playoffs and see what's happening. I just feel like it goes backwards in terms of excitement.
But how's that different than any other sport?
I mean, that's a good question. Like, I don't know the solution.
I
I'm
can
not saying
speak to that
I love watching the
specifically.
finals more elsewhere, but yeah, Ben, I'd love to hear you speak to.
I actually completely agree, and I'll tell you what's more exciting than the NHL finals, which is the NBA's conference finals, which are on right now. And you're watching superstars on the court every minute of every game, and every game they're doing something awesome. Whereas like
Yeah.
I'm watching the Dallas Stars in the fourth round of the NHL playoffs, and Tyler Seguin is useless out there. Jamie
Yeah.
Benn is not himself. Like the guy, like that used to be a line that we would talk about where you'd run to the waiver wire to get the third guy on that line. That is no longer the case. And so I think the NHL finals are for the teams or the fans of those teams more than anything else.
Totally agree. And I'll add, like, on the NBA front, I mean, I got into watching the NBA as the Raptors have, grown to be a real contender and have really enjoyed those games. But I think one thing working against the NHL is that it's such a physical game. Not to say that the NBA is not physical, but I think there's a much better chance that your players are not playing banged up, at 60 to 70% capacity by the end of the playoffs, that when they get to the championships in the NBA, they're still like able to do their best stuff. Whereas in the NHL, I don't think that's the case. Every highlight is a blocked shot, which actually, is sometimes the case in the NBA too. And I actually, at first, that was a gripe for me. But then, like, as I see more and more blocked shots, like, it is fun to see the talent level and like the lack of fear of an NHL forward or defenseman just like throwing themselves in front of it. But also, it's not the highest skilled play that I want to see over and over. And neither are the goals that are scored in the Stanley Cup finals, right? And as you get later into the playoffs, it's a lot more of these chippy goals, almost always a deflection or a redirect or like something unexpected. The puck ricochets or careens, and someone, who manages to get position in front just is able to slam it home. That's the most common goal we see in the finals and in the playoffs as it goes forward. That's also, I think, a result of the teams becoming better, right? Like in the early rounds, there's one team who might just be able to take advantage of the other. But I would love to see more higher skilled plays in the Stanley Cup finals from really healthy and able players.
Yeah, so it's interesting. First of all, like, yeah, this playoffs has been even more compressed than usual. So maybe that's leading to it in this playoffs. I would say, Brian, yeah, you make some good points. Like, I think a chore is a strong word to use. Like, definitely to me, that's a little too far. Like, I've enjoyed watching it still. But I think a point that you both were sort of hovering around is that in the NBA, also it seems like the best players are usually on the teams that make it to the finals, right? LeBron James has been in the finals, what is like 10 past seasons, or except for the 1 year he was injured. So I think in the NBA, like one player can like carry their team so far where you're almost guaranteed that the finals are going to have like a superstar player, unlike in the NHL where everyone was complaining. I think you guys, especially after the play-in round when, McDavid and Crosby and all the superstars got eliminated. So now all of a sudden we're in the finals. So like Tampa has a lot of stars, but you brought up, Ben, a bunch of Dallas Stars players who maybe people aren't as excited to watch. Maybe if we were watching Edmonton versus Tampa Bay and we had like McDavid versus Kucherov, that could be a lot of fun, but obviously not if what Brian's saying that everyone's like injured. I see, Brian, you're sighing here.
Well,
you're not happy with this.
Well, you're turning it into a please like my sport. Like, I'm not saying the NBA is better than the NHL. Like, I agree. Like, I don't love that aspect of the NBA, and I'm not saying I wish the NHL was more like the NBA. I'm just saying the NBA playoffs, I think, have a better, more entertaining arc than the NHL playoffs do.
I mean, I definitely didn't mean it that way. Like I was legit agreeing with you and saying that I think the NBA benefits.
Yeah, but then you're like, but the NBA has one guy can win the game. Hockey's a team sport, which
but I didn't
true.
mean that as like it's better or worse. I just mean like that's just how it is. Like Michael Jordan, I watched that documentary and the Bulls were a championship team. And then Michael Jordan went to play baseball, and then all of a sudden they like didn't make the play, or they barely made the playoffs like in a couple of years. So it's just a fact that in the NBA a star player makes a big difference. In the NHL, obviously McDavid makes a big difference, but Edmonton still got eliminated by the Chicago Blackhawks, who aren't supposed to be a very good team. So obviously it's a lot more of a team sport, and McDavid didn't have whatever. We know what happened.
In the chat, we've got Shams asking, is 7 games too many? And Go Hollywood was saying thinks the variance of teams playing is exciting as opposed to the same team again and again. So you have, I guess you have more teams and more styles to watch. more players to watch. And then added Palat's goal was pretty sexy. It's true. Like there's still some really fun moments. It's just, again, I feel like they get fewer and farther between as the playoffs roll on.
How fun was that Stamkos like 6 minutes of play that he got
Yeah.
in, where he like had a few shifts, scored that great goal, and then like called it a night, which is totally reasonable. But that was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But in terms
I agree.
of like the entertainment value and stakes, like the stakes go up, but the entertainment value goes down. So like that one, even if it's a garbage goal, is like an amazing moment, and that's awesome and exciting. But I would trade that. Like I don't think it's a good trade-off.
Yeah. Also, the point that was made by, I think it was Go Hollywood. It's just like, but this is every sport, but it's like, it's fun when there's like 6 games on a night and you get to choose between all these different, now we're watching the same game, or the same teams playing, I guess, somewhat of the same game every single day. So I can understand why, Brian, maybe after 6 times watching Dallas versus Tampa Bay, you're not as excited to watch Dallas versus Tampa Bay, as opposed to in the early rounds where you get to watch different people play every single day.
Right.
Ben, sorry, you had a comment, and then we can move on to more fantasy stuff.
Yeah, I think I was going to add on to what Brian said, which is like, I definitely feel like my complaints about the NHL playoffs are personal. Like it's not the NBA is a better sport because I like the third and fourth rounds of the playoffs more. But I just feel like the NHL for me is most watchable when I'm learning and following about fantasy. And then also when my team is still alive, or the matchup itself is really fun and fast. And I don't think that the NHL does a good job of emphasizing those qualities when it gets into the deepest parts of the playoffs. So for me, it becomes less watchable. But I understand for others that they enjoy seeing these different teams make it to the final, and fair enough.
So I guess can I bring up another couple players that I feel like I sort of, in the same vein as before, like players who I already was starting to form an opinion. Now the playoffs have like cemented it in a way which maybe I wouldn't have had it as cemented if we didn't have these playoffs. One guy that jumps out to me is Brock Nelson on the Islanders. So he's coming off a career year where he had 54 points in 68 games for a 65-point pace. The year before that, he had a 53-point pace, which was his career year at that point. Before that, he was not even a half-point per game guy most of the time. And obviously, he's gotten a bigger role on the team. Like he's playing more minutes than ever before. And in these playoffs, I think led the team in points. I'll have to bring that up. I don't think he had more points than Barzal, or it was very close. He ended with 18 points in 22 games. In our like keeping Karlsson playoff pool drafts, like you could see he was getting drafted higher and higher in every round, which obviously makes sense just because there were fewer teams, but also like even taking that into account, like people were starting to realize, man, this guy's like reliable. Like when the Islanders, like he seems to get a point almost every time the Islanders play. And I feel like now going to next season, maybe it would have been easier to like when making our projections to be like, okay, maybe he like overperformed this year. He's never been a 65-point guy before. So what are the chances he'll do it again? But now after this playoffs, I do kind of get the feeling like he does, like just watching those Islanders games. Also, he does seem like a 65-point guy. Like he seems like a solid bet to get a point, if not every game, then, pretty often 3 out of 4 games.
I was going to let Ben take that.
I mean, I agree, Elon. I think that, but to what I mentioned earlier about how I don't want the RTP, I'm not letting the RTP influence me too much. Brock Nelson was a 65-point guy in the regular season. So I think that this is about what we're going to see from Brock Nelson moving forward. But I do agree, from drafts 2019-20 to drafts 2020-21, definitely much more interested in Brock Nelson.
Yeah, he's Brock solid. He's someone you can count on night in, night out. He's rarely going to go super cold, or at least that's how it feels. We know since Barry Trotz has arrived in Long Island that Nelson has been his favorite. So he's going to keep getting time in all situations. He's going to keep getting opportunities to at least put up a point or two. And he is solid enough to be able to handle that. And, before these playoffs, I'd say, 55 points is a safe bet. I'm willing to go up to 60, but I also wouldn't go that much higher. As nice as the consistency is, I think the upside is pretty limited with Nelson.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Brian, because like he just put up a 65-point pace season and a higher pace in the playoffs, and now you're still saying you won't go higher than 60. So you still need more time. So maybe next year, if you could get 65 again, then maybe you'll be ready to call him a 60. I don't know. I feel like you still won't ever go 65.
Okay, so maybe I'll go 60. But yeah, I'm not going to go a lot. I don't think I can go a whole lot higher.
Okay. So and then to be fair, let me go the other direction. And again, I think what Ben said is right. Like, I guess I use the playoffs not to completely change my mind about players, but maybe players who already had a regular season that was different than what we were expecting, then the playoffs could help cement that, okay, maybe this actually is just who this guy is from now on. And in the other direction, I'll bring up, and I have a feeling, Brian, I'm not sure actually what you'll say, Brian, but Claude Giroux is coming off a not great regular season where he only had 53 points in 69 games for a 63 point pace, which is one of his worst seasons like of his career. Actually, if you look down his career, his point pace, he's generally well above a 63 point guy. And then in the playoffs, he was even worse, right? And obviously they played against Carey Price, who was tough to score against, and he played against the Islanders. So you could say that like they had a tough draw in terms of who he was playing against, but only 8 points in 16 games. And it just makes me hard. I'm not saying that he's going to be now like a 40 point guy like he looked like in the playoffs, but maybe this like 60 point Giroux is actually like the new Giroux for next year. When if he had like gone off in the playoffs, maybe then I would have been more confident to say like, okay, like, he just had a down year, but now I'm thinking, maybe this is him. So I'm curious to know if you guys like agree with that, or if you think I'm giving too much weight to this playoffs where they played against Montreal and the Islanders.
I think I'm going to mostly agree. Like, I'm looking at his numbers and it doesn't seem like there was like some poor variance. He had a 58% IPP when he's usually closer to 75 or even 80%. So that's one place where he might have lost out at 5-on-5 in the regular season. But honestly, he also lost a pretty good chunk of deployment. He was down over a minute of ice time per night at 5-on-5 compared to several of the previous years. So I think we're seeing his ice time decline. And I think that might be an Alain Vigneault thing. I think this just might be how he's viewed by his coach and what his usefulness is at this stage in his career. I'd like to believe that Giroux still has more in the tank, but he's not given me a whole lot of reason to believe it's there. I could also mention that his on-ice shooting percentage dropped, but not to an unhealthy level. Like, you could argue it might have been a little high in his 85-point season in 82 games. I mean, he's coming off like he's had a really strange career, right? He was super amazing, and then he dropped off, and then he had a 102-point season that came out of nowhere after a 58-point season where he essentially felt like he doubled his point totals. But of course, we warned against it. We didn't think it was going to last. One of the things he had going for him was a crazy career high shooting percentage, which fell off, but he still managed to be over a point per game in 18-19 and then fell off again this season to some extent. So he's not someone I'm counting on. I'm still open to being surprised by Claude Giroux, but if I'm drafting him, I'm thinking like 65, 70 points. And I'm not thinking that I'm not hoping for any more than that.
I agree. I mean, it's just, we talk about non-linear outcomes, and we're looking at the last few years of Claude Giroux's career. He's been up and he's been down. I think that 70 points would be a solid bounce back at this point. And yeah, I agree with the two of you on him.
So would it be, I think the real hot take here would be, what if someone projected Brock Nelson to have more points than Claude Giroux? Would either of you give me 2-1 odds on that bet?
That Brock Nelson outscores Claude Giroux?
Yeah.
I don't really I've never been good at odds and understanding exactly what I'm giving up. If I give you 2-1 odds, that means you make twice as much if you win the bet.
Yeah. So let's say $5. If Giroux has more points, I give you $5. If Nelson has more points, you give me $10.
Well, I know your stance on both those guys, so I would not give you those odds because I think you'd make the bet anyway.
I'm not actually talking about like making the bet. I'm more doing as a thought experiment for the listeners. Like, how confident are you that Giroux is better than Brock Nelson at that point is what I'm trying to get at. I'm not trying to make $20 off of you or $10 off of you, Brian.
I'm pretty confident.
Okay. So
yeah.
We'll
I mean, we would all draft Giroux ahead of Nelson, yes?
By several rounds.
Yeah, and I think it would be a mistake. Like, I think I'll let someone else draft Giroux.
Okay.
I'm not saying that, like, I also would take Giroux over Nelson, but I'm saying it might be a lot. People might not. I just think that they're both going, like, this season, by the way, Brock Nelson pays for more points than Claude Giroux. So not saying that that'll happen next year, but I'm just saying I think in people's minds, Brock Nelson is still like boring Brock Nelson and Claude Giroux is still superstar Claude Giroux. And I think they might be, maybe it's not like done yet that one is past the other, but I wonder if they're a lot closer than people think. I guess that's the main point I'm making with these past two players I brought up.
I agree.
So Ben, you got another takeaway? I've got a couple more they get less and less exciting, as if like my existing ones have already been exciting.
Maybe
but-
we should lightning round whatever's left between you and Ben. And I'll end with my last hot take.
Okay, Ben, hit us.
All right, this one's kind of my last one. I'll be honest. I wanted to talk about Dallas players a little bit more. I mentioned it earlier. I'm not getting too excited about anyone there. I do think if you look at numbers, like obviously Miro Heiskanen stands out. I think that there's a bit of a Norris Trophy type trap there, kind of like with Seth Jones a few years ago, where it was like people were so hype about how good at hockey Seth Jones was that they were starting to think like, oh, and he'll also be a top 5 fantasy defenseman. And I think that he has that capability because his back end stats are so good, but I don't think that Columbus is offensively gifted enough to kind of put him in that echelon. So Miro Heiskanen, I think, is similar. He's obviously amazing. I think he's every bit as good as he's been these playoffs, but I think there's a bit of a mirage as far as even strength scoring over 82 games or however long next year is. So I'm watching there. The one breakout that I do find really interesting in Dallas, and somebody who obviously Denny Gurianov stands out as somebody who looks really good in low minutes, but Rope Hintz was supposed to break out this year and he didn't really hit that height. I feel like watching that team this year, and especially how much he's getting used on the power play, he's shooting a ton. He's still not on that top unit, but he's shooting like crazy on the second unit. And I think that Rope Hintz is a guy who you could get him at exactly the same price you got him in drafts 1 year ago. And I think that you have every reason to be as hopeful moving into next year as you did going into this one.
I'll definitely make a bet of Gurianov over Hintz if you wanted to. Like, I guess I don't really. Well, Hintz is injured right now, and again, then we don't know if like it'll come out that maybe he was even injured for a lot of the rest of the playoffs. His ice time has been all over the place, all throughout the playoffs. Like even with Dallas being successful, he fell down to like 12 minutes and a half for a couple of games, even 12 minutes, and then he bounced up to like 16, 17 in some games. Those might be overtime games. Actually, I haven't checked. So I don't know. I haven't really seen as much from Hintz as you're bringing on. I think Gurionov has been exciting. But I think the main takeaway you had is like Dallas as a whole, just we'll see if they could be an offensive team next year. And the Heiskanen thing is interesting because I think a lot of people will be drafting him as like a 50-point defenseman next year. I also think Heiskanen is going to be drafted probably ahead of John Klingberg. And Heiskanen overall, if you look at their playoff numbers, 26 points in 26 games for Heiskanen, only 21 points in 25 games for Klingberg. But, more recently, I guess I'd have to bring it up, but I feel like in the last couple of rounds, Klingberg has really picked up the pace. Heiskanen now has points in 3 straight games. He kind of went a little quiet there at the end of the Vegas series and at the start of the Tampa series. So now he has points in 3 straight games for whatever that's worth. But Klingberg hasn't gone away yet. Like I think a lot of people just assumed at one point, even in the playoffs, maybe before that like it's like just a matter of time, and maybe as soon as the start of next year, where John Klingberg loses a lot of responsibility and Heiskanen takes that over. I don't know. Like Klingberg's really good. Clearly, we're seeing that he has a lot of offensive upside, and maybe we're looking at 2 45-point defensemen next year. Neither of them like maybe jumps up to 60, and maybe neither of them falls below like 45.
Yeah, it seems like the like this calls back to what we were talking about Dallas at the start of the show, that like I don't think this is a time to get carried away with the way that Dallas is producing. They had a fantastic regular season, and I don't think they want to change their playbook a whole lot. I think they've had to change it a little bit because they're playing these high offense teams, and they're going to need to score goals against Colorado, against Vegas, against Tampa. But preferably, they would rather get a 1-0 lead on you and then just shut it down. They have a great record in 1-goal games this season. Of course, that stat is fraught with all kinds of biases and little changes, and it's not really a reliable way to look at games, but I don't think it's a misrepresentation of the way that the Stars hope to play, which limits the upside of any of these guys. So like between Gurianov and Hintz, I like Denis Gurianov, even though Hintz seems to be a guy with a whole lot of skill. I just don't know that he's ever going to be able to show it to the full extent. And I feel the same about Gurianov, but at least Gurianov has like this killer shot that should at least get him some goals from situations that don't always appear to be goal rich or a place where you could rack up a point. And then going to Heiskanen and Klingberg, Elon, I agree with you. Heiskanen 35 points in 68 games this year, which is great for a sophomore, and we've seen him be even better in the postseason. But I still see defense being the huge priority in Dallas, and I'm not counting on either one surpassing 50 points. I think Heiskanen is probably going to be one of the most overdrafted players in this year's upcoming drafts.
Ooh. Yeah, so it's a hot take. Brian, most of your takes I feel like have been that players are not going to get as many points, I guess, unless it's like a Mikko Koivu or someone who's done it in the past.
Oh my God, don't
I
even.
kid. Okay. Can
Yeah.
I comment or can I, Ben, do you have any response to that before I get to my next hot take, which I guess
No,
is
I
like,
agree that Klingberg looks really good though. I think that it's a 1A 1B situation, and I think that they're both going to be useful, and yeah, I'm wary of Heiskanen.
yeah, I mean, I like Heiskanen a lot, by the way, long term. Like I'm talking about like maybe for next year for fantasy. I agree with Brian that he'll be overdrafted maybe, but in a dynasty league, I feel like in a couple years from now, like obviously it depends on what Dallas, like things don't always stay the same forever, right? So I think Heiskanen is super talented. I bought his rookie card, but my plan is to get it graded and then not sell it for like 5 years. I think that's when he's, when he's like starting to approach like the end of his contract, let's say. Anyways, whatever. I think he's going to be great, but yeah, next year he might be overvalued because of a great, like especially great early playoffs. Like you look at the gaudy playoff numbers, and a lot of it is from the first 2 rounds against like Dallas. Really ended up feasting a bit on who did they play again? I have to actually remind myself what happened early in the playoffs. Okay, I've got it here. So they played against Calgary, and then they played against Colorado, where actually you wouldn't think you should be able to feast against Colorado. But those games, if you recall, were like 5-4 games, like over and over again. So there were a lot of goals being scored. And then Vegas and Tampa are more representative of the types of games you'd think are going to be happening in the regular season. And there Heiskanen's fallen to more of like a half point per game. Like I said, he's gotten a point each of the most recent 3 games. So speaking of defensemen, this is I guess a takeaway that I've already sort of shared on the podcast, but just to solidify it here, like defense for next year is fascinating to me in terms of, I feel like we can list 10 players with like almost even odds for who's going to lead defenseman in points next year. And I think the playoffs have only like made me more confident that, because now like maybe Hedman had started to fall off a little bit. Like at this point, Hedman is obviously in that conversation with the playoffs he's had. Don't forget Shea Theodore and the amazing run he had with Vegas before they started to get shut down by Dallas. Hughes and Makar, of course. Then we have like a Heiskanen, who maybe we're saying we don't think he'll be one of the top scoring defensemen, but I'll bet you a lot of people might put him there. And then of course we have the guys who were there this year in John Karlsson, Roman Josi. I was about to say Shea Weber, but I guess he was on Nashville at some point. I don't think he'll be in that conversation. Plus, you've got the old guard of Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns, who I don't think are done yet. So it's just like so many names of defensemen where I wouldn't be surprised if any of them turn out to lead defensemen in scoring next year, which I think is pretty wild. I don't think that we've had that before in the history of keeping Karlsson. Like I feel like if we did a Schmore defense board episode where we tiered defensemen, I feel like we'd have like a couple in the top tier in most years and be pretty confident it'll be one of them. And next year it's like, it could be like all these guys that I just said. Like I think probably if I had to bet right now, I'd pick Hughes or Makar, but I'm not like so confident.
I like that take a lot. And I think it really does show how many super talented high-end offensive defensemen exist who are also capable of not just submarining their team on defense to the point that they don't get the deployment that they would need to put up 60, 65, 70 points to lead the league in defensive scoring. It used to be, as you mentioned, Burns, Karlsson, then a gap, then Hedman, and like depending on the year, 1 or 2 other guys, and then another gap, and then the pack.
Yeah, Chris Letang was there. I remember also PK Subban was there for a short time. But
yeah, everyone's been. I mean, that's the thing. It shifts, right? You've had like Klingberg was up with Hedman at some point too, in my mind. But now it's like you have this more even landscape amongst the top. So it's almost like goalies and defense have switched places in terms of how many guys are available on the top end, and then what you're looking at once you get past that group.
Yeah, I'm not going to be the first person to take a defenseman next year. I think I'll be I'm happy to grab 2 of the 6 to 10 range rather than 1 or 2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it used to be a real hot thing to do. Elon, I think like as we started the podcast, taking a defenseman in the first round sort of became our habit, our thing. And like we would recommend like the value over replacement is huge. And it's really waning
Yeah.
now. The reasoning to do that is you just said, Ben, I don't need to reach and make sure I get Burns, Karlsson, or even Hedman in my first or second round because there's plenty of guys out there. Like I can wait for the D run to start and then basically still get a guy who will keep up or should keep up reasonably well with the first two guys picked.
Yeah, everything you guys are saying, I agree with. I will point out that there still is a cliff that comes, right? Like I mentioned, like 10 guys that I think are like all like good bets to be like 60+ point defensemen. And then I think we'll have to take a look at the list and we'll look at projections for next year. It might be the kind of thing where the reason to take a defenseman early will be because you might want to get like 2 or 3 of these guys potentially, because then there's a huge drop. Like, there's a value over replacement still, but it's not between number 1 and number 3. Now it's between like number 10 and number 11. There might be a big drop there. So we'll have to look and see, but definitely lots of big names right around the top of defensemen. So if you only need one, yeah, you definitely don't need to rush to grab whoever is going to be I wonder even who's going to be the top draft defenseman in drafts next year. I assume like Makar,
I
John
think it'll be
John
Hughes or
Karlsson,
McCarr.
right?
John
Yeah.
Karlsson, maybe. Oh, I also didn't
It's
even mention
gotta be Karlsson.
I didn't even mention Dougie Hamilton, who was among one of the top defensemen before he got injured this year. So there's like even probably names I forgot. Thomas Chabot at one point was like amongst the top defensemen a couple years ago in Ottawa. So there's a lot of big names out there.
I bet Dougie continues his trend of being that like budget high-end guy that you can get a little bit cheaper because people continue to underrate him after the injury.
Yeah, well, especially considering I just forgot about him when I was listing all these top defensemen. So maybe that'll happen in your drafts as well, and you could get him a lot later because of that injury. So I got a couple more. I guess we're doing lightning round here, so I'll just like throw these out. This is one that I had a while ago again, but on Chicago, after Alex DeBrincat's down year, I think he would have been a guy like Giroux to sort of assume like, hey, he'll probably be better next year. Then like these playoffs really kind of cemented to me that like it's going to be tough for DeBrincat to get back to those gaudy numbers that he put up a couple years ago, because he might not even have a spot on the top power play waiting for him, because it seems like Kubalik and Kirby Dach might be there with Taves and Kane and leave, Strome and DeBrincat on the outside looking in. And same for just like general deployment. So I would say at this point, it would be really fun for us to do a draft of just Chicago forwards right now. And like, why don't you guys just give a quick ranking of Kubalik, Dach, DeBrincat? I'm curious now, just this is say total points just to keep it simple. Like right now, I don't know, part of me kind of thinks it might be like, I guess you would leave it. The easy thing is just put Dach third just because he's only a sophomore, but I feel like he's potentially got a big bump coming. Like he looked really good in the playoffs. And yeah, I don't know. I might say Kubalik, Dach, DeBrincat, but I can see it being close. But I can also see it. I don't know. It's like definitely all I'm saying is mainly like DeBrincat is not a sure thing to me, and I'm not ready to call him like a bounce back candidate for next year. I think there's very good reason to think he's even like worse than this year as he gets even less power play time.
I put so much energy into describing why I think DeBrincat it like deserved a better fate than he had this season, but I will give it to you that there does seem to be that deployment thing blocking him, and the emergence of Kubalik and the presence of Dach from actually getting up to where he once was. DeBrincat, just for anybody just tuning in, had a shooting percentage at even strength below 5%. His shooting percentages in 2 years prior, 13% and 15%. Those are both rounded numbers, but essentially he was shooting 1/3 or 1/5 as successfully as he had in previous seasons. And that, to me, has appeared to be straight up variance. So, look, I have all the faith in the world that DeBrincat is as dangerous a goal scorer as we've seen him be in his rookie and sophomore season. So I'm not at all writing him off. Elon, I still think he's a really incredible young hockey player who still has 40 goal potential, but we'll give to you that depth chart is getting a little crowded. And if he continues getting crowded out, obviously that's going to keep him from reaching that potential. But I do think he's 22 years old, Elon. Patrick Kane is 31. Jonathan Taves is 32. At some point, they're going to need someone to become the new Kane and the new Taves. I think the best bet to be that guy in Chicago, who's on the roster right now, is Alex DeBrincat. So I would want them to give him that opportunity to bloom and blossom and grow his game so that as those guys taper off, he can just pick up where they've left off. So that's why I still favor DeBrincat. I like Doc. I have my hesitations about Kubalik, but I still like him. But in terms of just straight up talent or upside, I would rank DeBrincat first, but in actual what's going to happen next year, it's not so clear cut. I'll give it to you. It seems very even between the three. Like DeBrincat isn't a guy you need to reach ahead of Doc and Kubalik to get.
Yeah, so I think that I would probably still. I think you have to go Kubalik at the top after this past year, just based on value right now. And then I think I would take Doc over DeBrincat right now. As crazy as that sounds, I mean, we're a year removed from Alex DeBrincat putting up, what was it? Did he score 40? Yeah, he got 41 goals. So crazy to think that that it's even a discussion. But watching Doc take that top power play spot really raised my interest level on him.
Yeah, Brian, don't forget Kirby Dach, 19 years old. He was drafted 3rd overall last year. So it's not, I think that most people would actually say that maybe his upside is higher than DeBrincat, but there's room for both. Dach's a center. Like theoretically, we could have DeBrincat, Dach, and Kubalik as a line, but you bring up how we have to wait for Taves and Kane to get out of the way, but they're not that old. Like I still think if you're projecting like 5 years down the road, then sure. But like I think that Taves and Kane aren't going anywhere. At least that's the impression I got from my interview with Mark Lazarus.
I don't expect them to just go to up and leave, but I expect, I mean, they're both elite players, so they might be able to hold off an age-related decline for longer than others. Yeah. But it's coming if it hasn't already come. Like we've seen, it hasn't. Of course, Jonathan Taves be amazing, and Patrick Kane has been continued being amazing. But also point taken on Doc. Like I 100% agree that he could have upside higher than DeBrincat, but being as young as he is, I think he's further from reaching it than DeBrincat could be. Like DeBrincat could realistically reach his upside this next season. Doc, I wouldn't say.
Brian, I think you're simultaneously overrating Jonathan Taves and underrating Patrick Kane as far as their current status within the organization. Like I think that Patrick Kane is so clearly far and away in terms of fantasy the number one option on the wing on that organization, and that puts a cap on Alex DeBrincat in a way that Jonathan Taves currently does not hold indisputable offensive number one center. That's a hole in the organization that Kirby Dach might fill for years, that Alex DeBrincat. Listen, I'm not trying to project or prognosticate 5-10 years down the road, but I do think that if we're reading the signs right now, there's a clearer path for Kirby Dach than there is for Alex DeBrincat.
All right. And so I guess to finish off, I'll just rhyme off the rest of the things I wrote down here. Number 1, the Jets were total poop without Mark Scheifele in the lineup. So I think that's not really a fantasy takeaway, but it's just like, that probably is not good. They need to not only have one good center on the team. So if Brian Little is not ready to come back, and even if he is, obviously the Jets need to figure something out. I'm sure they know that, but just a reminder of how things fell apart so quickly for them against Calgary once Scheifele went down.
Is this a Connor Hellebuck watch take? Because like, that's kind of the situation, right? Like they lost all their defensemen last year, and now they have one top 6 center. They don't have anyone else right now in the organization who appears to be able to create offense in down the middle. Like to me, that's my takeaway is Connor Hellebuck is gonna have to be amazing again to be good in fantasy.
Yeah, and he did okay. He played 4 games in the playoffs. 2 of those games he was great, even though he lost one of them, letting in 2 goals in that final game against Calgary. One of them he let in 5 goals, but again, it's like hard to hold it against Hellebuck. So I think Hellebuck is good, but yeah, it depends what your categories are, right? Like I think definitely goals against average is going to be a big problem for him because Winnipeg is in trouble potentially, but we'll see. I mean, he had a great year this year, but usually goalies who win the Vezina end up not doing as well the following year. So I think already Hellebuck's probably going to be overrated going into next season in terms of goalies. Like I wouldn't be reaching for him. I'd rather take, like if people want to take him over like a Carter Hart, like I'll definitely take Carter Hart before Connor Hellebuck because of the team situation. But again, depends on your league settings and all of that. But yeah, I agree with you. You had a really funny tweet. Was that you, Ben, that said that when Hellebuck won the Vezina, that was a subtweet at the Jets? You're muted.
No, sorry, that Zoom gave me a weird prompt. That was my wonderful co-host and co-tweeter Lewis.
Yeah, that was very funny. It's like the reason they gave him the trophies because it's so impressive how well he did on such a bad team. But,
100%.
Okay, what else do I have here? Alex Tuck needs a shot. That was one takeaway for me. I'd love to see Alex Tuck get a consistent shot in the top 6. And then Kadri and Burakovsky seem to be like for real. Like I think they're going to both have huge seasons next year. And Brian, actually, I remember when we talked about Colorado, Brian brought up a really good point, which is like the reason why maybe Kadri struggled a bit in the regular season was because Rantanen and Landeskog were getting injured, which meant that a guy like Burakovsky was going to the top line, which then meant that Kadri had to play with much worse players. So I think a fully healthy Avalanche team that can just put Landeskog, Rantanen, and McKinnon on the top line, and then Kadri with Burakovsky and hopefully someone else, maybe Taylor Hall, I don't know, on the second line. Like I feel like we could be seeing huge seasons from Kadri and Burakovsky next year. So
I'd love that for sure. We both agree that Kadri's capable of it, and we both agree that Burakovsky, if he can get consistent deployment and be consistent himself, can get there too. They could finally be the match that like they might need each other, and hopefully they get to be with each other.
So sweet. All right. Well, this has been a blast. Ben, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your takeaways and having the idea to do this takeaways episode in the first place. People, if you liked this episode, or if you didn't like this episode, tweet at Average Time on Ice and let them know. But I'm sure you're going to say that you did like the episode.
Please be nice to me.
Yeah, that's true. Who are these people going on Twitter and not being nice? But that's a whole other stupid rant, and I won't get into that. But yeah, follow Ben. So I guess it's at AVG Time on Ice on Twitter to get his and Lewis's and Jade's tweets, which are always a lot of fun. You're also at Burnett Hockey, I believe, on Twitter. If someone wants to get in touch with you directly, there's an underscore right in there.
You are correct, at Burnett_hockey. Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. It's always super fun to chat with you guys and be in the room while the two of you go at each other.
Yeah, well, most of the listeners won't hear because I'll edit out all of the rude things I said, and it'll sound like I was a complete mensch on the show. But people watching the live show definitely know what Ben is talking about. So Brian, I guess with that, let's wrap up the show here. So as always, follow us on Twitter at Keeping Karlsson. We'd love to hear your reviews and feedback on like Apple Podcasts or wherever. Like give us that 5-star review. It really does us a big favor. Doesn't cost you a thing. If you did want to throw us a buck a month, we've got our Patreon still going. We're going to keep it going. We're going to try our best to come up with ways to keep engaging with the patrons, you know, even once the playoffs are over. By the time the playoffs are over, we're a couple of weeks and we got free agency, and all of a sudden we have a lot of new exciting things to talk about. So we're going to keep going with the patrons. We're going to keep going with the podcast. So that's keepingkarlsson.com/patron for more information about that Patreon program. But with that, I think it's time to cue the outro music, and Brian, you could go ahead and read us the credits.
All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey and powered by our patrons. Logo art by Brandon Weeb. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber
Brian,
Hockey.
can you just do it again? I don't like the logo art by Brandon Weeb.
Okay. It was an accident, but it was not a style choice. All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey and powered by our patrons. Logo art by Brandon Weeb. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Pool, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, Charting Hockey, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, Roto World, and Fantrax. Elon, I think you asked me to throw in last show, so there it is again. And that's it. Thanks a lot for I know you love the credits list.
I mean, I edited that out last time, by the way, this whole discussion about fan tracks. So maybe you could, I mean, we don't, it's like almost like you're throwing shade at fan tracks by like grudgingly putting it, either
I'm
do
not
it or
grudgingly.
don't.
I just
and
didn't use them.
I guess fan tracks.
I didn't use them, but maybe you did.
I'm not a fan, but I guess if you use it, then might as well. Okay, I probably won't use that because again, I don't think fan tracks will like that. Can you just say the last few ones again, just so I can have another edit option?
Do you want me just? I'll do it all from the start.
No, you just say your list of sites.
Yeah. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Pool, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, Charting Hockey, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, Roto World, and Fantrax.
Great job as always, Brian. Oh, speaking of fan tracks, no one cares, but the Keeping Karlsson playoff pool is really coming down to it. It's between me and Ricard, and I don't know. There's a lot of drama there. Basically, that overtime could have decided it. It was very exciting. No one cares. Okay, great job as always, Brian. Thanks so much for joining us, Ben. Looking forward to come back with you. That didn't make sense. Looking forward to come back to you with another episode about something fun. Don't worry, we'll come up with something next week.
Until then, remember, fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Great.
I'm so tired. That was really long.
Thank you guys so much.
Brian, you could have saved it.
What, you didn't want me to say that?
It's so funny. I had a good time.
Oh, sorry. I also had a good time.
Ben,
You don't believe I had a good time.
I do. This was a blast. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. We'll chat soon.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah,
Bye.
Ben's got the excuse to be tired. Aren't you in a what time is it for you right now?
It's 10:40 p.m. Elon.
Oh my god. Get to bed.
Luckily, I don't work till 4 tomorrow. So
Oh.
4 in the afternoon.
in the afters. Yep.
Phew.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
See ya.
Thanks, Ben. It was fun having
Thank
you.
Always. Yep.
All right. Thanks everyone in the chat room. Brian, this is a blast. Was I rude? I probably was. I don't know. Sometimes I edit and then I'm like, why did I say that? But I don't know. I'm just trying to be funny. I'm playing a character.
It's like your default is to be rude. Like when you don't know what to do, you're just like, be rude.
Yeah.
I was watching, we were rewatching Community based on
too.
your well, because you said how much you were enjoying it. So it's a great show. It holds up. And just watch the debate episode. Man is evil. Man is good.
Yeah. So you think we have to decide what's
I think that's a
inside of
man
me.
is evil argument, that when you don't know what to say, it seems like you just jab.
I guess I'm a jabber, but I like getting jabbed. I like that whole dynamic of friends that sort of
Careful who you say that around.
Oh, like a serial killer.
There's just been a lot of double entendres this episode. I feel like more than usual.
Oh, so here's a little secret. I'm pretty sure I missed all of them. I'm not really a big double entendre guy. I don't really.
Me neither.
I'm an innocent. I mean, they don't even register in my head usually, unless it's really obvious. I generally am not. I'm not. I don't know. But you have a kid, so obviously you have more experience with these types of things.
How does having a kid?
Well, you had to do a certain thing to have a kid
That you have never done?
I mean, I don't know. I didn't. I'd imagine even trying to have a kid is a whole process.
I think that's a really strange point to be making. If you said I have a teenager, that would make more sense because they're probably making jokes
No,
or
I know. I was just trying to insinuate as a joke that you're maybe more sexually active than me. But
okay.
Maybe it's the opposite because I know when people have a kid, then they're so busy raising the kid that they don't have as many opportunities.
This is one of the better conversations we've ever had.
Are you saying that sarcastically?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh. Okay. We can talk about it later. We can compare.
I was like, but do you mean that sarcastically? Okay, well then let's continue it just later.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching.
I'm so tired. I'm sorry.
Bye everyone. Bye Brian.
Oh, you're saying bye to me? Okay.
Bye Brian first.
Bye everyone.
Go
Thanks for being
Hollywood
here.
And Shams second after Brian.
No, and I say bye, Go Hollywood and Shams, and Dave first, and then bye, Elon.
I didn't even say bye, Dave. That's how much higher you are than Dave. Dave will be after I press stop, and then I'll say bye to Dave. He won't even hear it. Okay, bye. See, again, I'm rude by default. I can't help it.
Why would you do that?
It's more fun. I don't know.